All right, for the next 2 hours, we are joined by one of the top real estate investors in the world. We are lucky enough to have Sam Zell, who is the chairman and co-founder of Equity Group Investments, here with us on set. Sam, thank you so much for coming in today.
My pleasure. It's fun.
Nobody knows real estate like you do, and we've been watching a lot of different things kind of play out in this space. You were just talking with Joe off camera about QE3 and what you think about the Fed's latest move. How does that shake things up in the real estate world? What does it mean for investing both on the commercial and on the residential side?
I guess the best answer I'd give you is that we're beginning to see the excess flow of capital. We're seeing too much capital chasing too few opportunities. And consequently, I think, number one, I think the effect of QE3 is nothing more than pushing up the stock market. And yet the stock market is being pushed up at record levels of limited trading. In other words, we have very, very low volumes, and the market goes up, which is manipulation. But it's a function of the fact that what's anybody to do with money? And nobody has any confidence in the future, so you limit your money to liquid. So Procter & Gamble, the REITs, anything that has a dividend is basically jumped for because there are no other alternatives. Nobody wants to make, look at your capital numbers last week. Nobody wants to make commitments beyond tomorrow. We run a company that does a lot of corporate enterprise installations. And, one of their triggers is when the enterprise projects start getting delayed, we're heading for a recession. And that's exactly what you're looking at right now. You're looking at capital expenditures across the board being deferred. And they're being deferred for a very good reason. They have no confidence. And there's nothing that what's going on right now, whether it be QE3 or the NLRB or all the other issues, that ain't building confidence.
Do they have any certainty when an election comes, or is this like...
I think the answer is that the certainty of the election is that it'll be over. Whichever guy wins is going to have to do an enormous amount of stuff very immediately. It's very hard, and based on all the other stuff we're looking at, it's very hard not to assume that we're on the cusp of going back into recession.
That's frightening.
Well,
enough.
it's the word frightening is too strong. I mean, the reality is that business is all about cycles, and we go through positive and negative cycles. And the opportunity for us is to take advantage of the positive cycles so as to mitigate the negative cycles. Yeah. What we've just come through is 4 years of a positive cycle that has been limited dramatically by political action. And so that's scary, and that's not what's supposed to happen.
We didn't get the bounce back that we were...
Well, I mean, we created so many headwinds. We created so many issues. I mean, the Environmental Protection Agency, you think based on what it does that it isn't part of America's,
when you
education.
Heard no president, not me, not any other president could have done any better over the last 4 years, given what he was handed, than this guy. When you heard Bill Clinton say that, Bill Clinton has never led us before.
You know what I thought?
What?
I could have done better. You could have done better. I think anybody who wasn't ideologically driven could have done better.
Okay, so what would have you done?
I'm sorry?
What would have you done? The meaningful steps, if there were
the
one, two, three things.
What wouldn't you have done?
We need jobs. We need jobs. So therefore, and we need exports.
Right.
So therefore, the first thing you do is you have the NLRB attack the number one exporter in the country on really preposterous grounds. Then you, in effect, start yelling at business and start threatening business. And then you get on the TV and talk about Las Vegas, and all of a sudden, the hotel business dies. The answer is that we need leadership, not criticism. We need encouragement, not discouragement. And until that scenario changes, I think the United States is, quote unquote, and I hate to use this word, in a malaise.
And is that a function though of new laws and legislation, or is that a function of rhetoric?
First of all, it's both, okay? In other words, we hope that it's new laws. The reality is it isn't new laws. It's using the executive branch to legislate by fiat or by threat. So you don't need a law because, in effect, the EPA is doing stuff all over the place. The NLRB is doing stuff that's not sanctioned by any law. It's a political decision, and it's extraordinarily negative to our country and to our economy.
The Journal has a great lead editorial. Did you read it? The lead editorial of the day? Mm-hmm. How razor thin the Obamacare vote really was. I mean, we know that Scott Brown, they had to do reconciliation after he won. But you look at the way Jim Webb won. He just barely won. You look at the way Al Franken sort of harvested the votes to beat Norm Coleman. Those were the ones that made a difference. Now, a couple of them, Evan Bayh and Jim Webb, are both saying we wish we hadn't done it this way. We wish we hadn't taken 20% of the economy with no Republican input and no Republican votes and really legislated the most unpopular bill in history that's still unpopular, and it really poisoned the whole political atmosphere. At the same time, you weren't trying to add jobs. It was almost an impediment to adding jobs.
You know, using the reconciliation process on perhaps the most important piece of legislation in the last 20 years is basically contrary to what America was built on. America was built on consensus. America was built on getting people on board and then legislating accordingly, not, in effect, using a Mickey Mouse process to pass a staggering bill that nobody who voted for it had ever read. And I mean, is this the way you run a country?
I guess Chuck, our friend, pushed Jim Webb on. So what are you saying? You wish you hadn't voted for him? He goes, no, I would. You know, but even getting him to admit, and Evan Bayh, you know,
Evan Bayh said he wouldn't.
No, he didn't say that he wouldn't. They just both have great regrets about the way that it was handled. And that's what got me about, and I think a lot of, you know, the country just listening to Bill Clinton and nodding and going, yeah, you could see the approval ratings go up, and that maybe we're not such, maybe he couldn't have done anything. And all of a sudden, one speech from Clinton, suddenly we're not at 8.1% unemployment for 43 months.
But come on, the reality is that Bill Clinton was a politician. What we need in this country is a politician. Hard as it is to say that.
You mean somebody who can work with both sides?
Triangulate.
In effect, who says, my objective is this. Now, who do I have to corral to get from here to there? That's called leadership. We know the stimulus bill was just sent down to Nancy Pelosi, and she wrote it. The president had no input. Dodd-Frank, same thing. Obamacare, similar. There's this cadre of people that are writing the laws of our country without input from at least half the country.
What's the most important thing that you think needs to be tackled head on? Do you think the fiscal cliff is the first issue, or? Well,
I mean, I think that there are a multiple of issues that have to be acted on. And obviously the fiscal cliff is a very important one. The trouble is the fiscal cliff is probably too easy to solve and kick down the road. And so therefore, I doubt that we will be in a fiscal cliff. I'm not sure, to be honest with you, that a fiscal cliff falling off the edge is not exactly what America needs.
Is this a wake-up call, you think, at this point? I mean, it's a pretty severe wake-up call to get.
You're describing a wake-up call to Rip Van Winkle. Come on, I mean, how many years have we been kicking the can down the road, and now we have a fiscal cliff, and this is the wake-up call?
Yeah.
You know, that's a wake-up call for Rip Van Winkle. I mean, that's all. You know, somebody's been sleeping for multitude of years.
So you're suggesting play with fire a little bit?
I'm suggesting that I'm interested in solving the problem.
Right.
And have you ever solved a problem without playing with fire? Have you ever solved a problem without going to the edge? Have you ever solved a problem with fear and uncertainty? I certainly have. I do that every day. That's called risk-taking. And you assess risk and reward. That's how our system is predicated on. That's what built America. And in effect, we have to look at every option with that in mind. We've tried everything under the sun, and every solution is kicked the can down the road. You had Erskine Bowles, which was a pretty fair down-the-road scenario. It's inconceivable to me that wasn't endorsed by the president, who in fact created the entity in the first place. So, you can keep playing games, but the reality is time is running out.
Right.
And if kicking the can down the road doesn't solve the problem, maybe you got to do something else. And maybe the only way you can convince the American people that we really have a problem is to create one.
We're going to talk more about this in just a moment. We did have some people who were here earlier this week with some thoughts on Simpson Bowles, if there's a way to bring it back. Would you be in favor of that?
I think that's too broad a question. In other words, there are obvious elements of Erskine Bowles that I think are terrific and basically represent compromise. To say the whole enchilada is...
But that's the problem. If you pick it apart bit by bit about what you like and what you don't.
But let's go back to our friend Bill Clinton.
Yeah.
What was Bill Clinton so good at?
Getting both sides to come together.
First of all, he got his rear end handed to him in the election. Yeah. What did he do? He responded. Yeah. What did President Obama do? He went further to the left. So, are you listening to the American people, or are you ideologically driven so that you, in effect, hear nothing? That's the $64 question, or maybe $64 billion question.
Okay.
Brilliant.
We're going to talk more about this with Sam Zell, who's our guest for the rest of the program.